Alrighty, so news of the week on this Saturday evening, and as I said before, we are getting to the part of the off season where pretty much most teams are already in their preseason, and that we're probably not going to get a lot of signings and transfer rumors that's going to be happening from now until the beginning of the regular season, because most teams have already started to shape out what their roster is going to look like for the opening weekend of the 2023 MLS regular season. But that being said, there were still definitely some signings and transfer rumors that happened in the past couple of days. But the first thing we're going to talk about is the allocation order rule. It no longer exists in MLS because MLS have announced that they have eliminated the allocation order rule. Now, for those of you that don't know what the allocation order is, for a long time, if you are an MLS team that is looking to sign a player that used to play in MLS, the only way you can do that is that you have to be at the top of the allocation order. And, recently we have seen a lot of teams that have been trying to trade up in the allocation order, whether you use general allocation money or use super draft pick to trade up at the top spot. And because of that, I think it kind of had lost the luster of what the allocation order was designed to do. I mean, I think many people have said that really this rule kind of was killed off because of what FC Cincinnati has done in the past couple of years, where Chris Albright has literally keep going into the top of the allocation order because they keep trading general allocation money to the team that is at the very top of the allocation order. And I think it was also getting to a point where teams were kind of fed up with that, and that, teams that are at the top of the allocation order are just getting free money because of it, and it just feels like it's a very outdated rule. So eventually they decided to eliminate the rule, but that also kind of brings the question, well, what's going to happen with St. Louis? Because, St. Louis coming into this expansion season, and when the allocation order still exists, they were at the top of the allocation order. And, knowing the fact that recently we have heard reports suggesting that, there's been a couple of teams that is interest in Carlos Carranzo, and that, in order for a couple of these teams that is looking to get him, they have to, of course, talk to St. Louis in terms of getting to that top of the allocation order. Well, with this rule being no longer in use, that means that they don't have to do that, but they did give St. Louis at least something where they actually have the first right of refusal. So what this basically said is that, they basically submit on any MLS players that used to play in MLS, and that they basically said that this is going to be the player that we're going to use as part of the first right of refusal kind of rule that the league, of course, gave us. And that basically, if there is any team that is looking to try and sign that player, then basically they have to talk to St. Louis about that and maybe give them some game because of the whole first right of refusal rule. And St. Louis have said that Josh Sargent is going to be that player for the first right of refusal, which is why this is definitely good news for those teams that are looking to sign Carlos Carranzo. And especially, I mentioned those teams. It's more like the California team, like the Galaxy, LAFC, and the San Jose Earthquakes, looking to trying to sign him, because now they don't really need to talk to St. Louis in terms of trying to go through to the top of the allocation order in order to get that spot to have the rights to sign that player. But yeah, overall, again, like I said, in my opinion, I think it's the right move, with the way that, again, it's a very outdated rule, and teams have just took advantage of it at a point where, I think it's kind of looking a little bit silly. It's almost similar to the whole discovery rights rule, and that I think that might be the next rule that is just kind of just a little bit dumbfounded, and at times where I don't even understand fully on the whole discovery rights rule, and that I think it's one that they definitely need to outlaw. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see now that we no longer have to talk about that. We no longer have to kind of mention the fact that, well, this player used to play in MLS, but, there's going to be a limited team that is able to get him because of the whole allocation order. And now it seems like that's not going to be the case. Any team can basically sign any of these former MLS player without have to go through that tedious process of basically talking to the team that is at the top of the allocation order and paying them whatever in order to get that spot. Now, moving on, in the next news, we got Inter Miami officially complete the permanent transfer of Leo Campana from Wolverhampton Wanders. And, this, of course, came right after the day when they announced Joseph Martinez have arrived Inter Miami after Atlanta United, of course, bought his contract out. And again, it's going to be interesting to see what exactly Phil Neville is going to do with both Campana and Martinez. I mean, I'm assuming that he has to put them both in the starting 11. He has to put them as a two-striker system, because I'm pretty sure Leo Campana did not decide to come back to Inter Miami to sit on the bench and play second fiddle to another more well-known striker in Joseph Martinez. And also, I think this is going to be a question that's going to be talked about until the beginning of the season. In the first game that Inter Miami play, is that how do you utilize two really good number 9s in your team? I mean, I think Inter Miami, they're basically very blessed the fact that they've been able to get two legitimately goal scorers. I mean, there are some teams that are dying to get a decent number 9, but now when you have two good number 9 in your roster, I'm going to be interested to see whether or not if Neville is going to decide to play a two-striker system again. I feel like he has to, because, again, Leo Campana, he did not come back to Inter Miami just to sit on the bench again and play second fiddle to potentially with Joseph Martinez starting week in and week out in that 9 spot. Now, the San Jose Earthquakes have signed goalkeeper Daniel from Brazilian Serie A club Internacional. Now, I have heard this rumor for a while, and, you know, today, when I actually heard that the Quakes were looking to sign a player, I was thinking it was Carlos Correzo. I thought for sure that they finally got him, because there's been a lot of rumors that it seems like he was going to be the one that's going to be a future Quakes player. But instead, to Quakes fans' disappointment, they actually got a different player in Brazilian goalkeeper Daniel from Serie A club Internacional, a guy that, as I mentioned, they've been linked with for a while. And again, this just feels like a very weird signings with the way that, you know, the Quakes have already committed to JT Marcinkowski, and especially the fact that, you know, one of the thing that I've said about the Cardinal sins of having a designated player as a goalkeeper or as a center back, I think one of the other Cardinal sins I would say, especially with goalkeeper, is signing him to an international spot. And especially with the way that, you know, they just burn an international spot on a goalkeeper that I don't even know if he's going to be a regular starter. I mean, I know there's been that whisper of JT Marcinkowski not being good enough last season. I mean, I know last season he definitely had a very inconsistent kind of year, but I didn't think that there was a point where you could say that, well, let's bring another goalkeeper and basically put him in there instead of JT Marcinkowski. I mean, I still feel like at the end of the day, probably JT Marcinkowski is going to get the spot. But again, that just begs the question of why exactly they need to sign a backup in this guy called Daniel, who, don't get me wrong, I have heard some good things about him. But at the same time, again, they just didn't need to burn an international spot. They could have been better off using that international spot in any position besides a backup goalkeeper. But that being said, moving on in the next news, we got Jordan Morris, Christian Roldan, and Danny Leyva has officially signed a new contract extension to the Seattle Sounders. Both Jordan Morris and Christian Roldan has signed a 5-year contract extension that goes to 2027, while Danny Leyva have signed a 4-year contract extension to stay with the Sounders, and there's also a 5th-year option if he desire. And again, this is not a big surprise because this has been on the rumor mill for a very long time, and it was pretty much not if all 3 of these players was going to sign a contract extension, but when exactly it is the case. And of course it is going to be the case as it officially announced, and that, you know, all 3 of these players, especially Jordan Morris and Christian Roldan, they're going to be the key pieces of this core that the Sounders, of course, had. Because, you know, when you look at this Sounders team, I mean, you know, they still have most of their core intact, but as many people have said, including myself, I still think they have one good year left in this core that they built, and then they maybe could go through, I wouldn't say a transitional period, but kind of a retooling period where they're going to still have a piece of the core still intact, but they're definitely going to be moving on to some of these older guys like Nico Ladero and Raul Ruidiaz eventually, and maybe bring in some new fresh blood from this team. And the good news for the Sounders is that they do have some decent player from the academy that can step in, or maybe they'll decide to do what they have always done, look in somewhere else and get a really good talent to come to play for their team and basically be an MLS Cup contender year in year out. Because after all, that's what the Seattle Sounders has been doing pretty much for a decade now. except for this season when they, of course, miss out on the playoffs. Now, moving on in the next news, we have two teams that have waived their player. We start with Sporting KC waiving Oro Russell, while DC United waiving goalkeeper Rafael Romo. Not a big surprise that both of these teams are waiving their respective player. I mean, Oro Russell. I mean, you talk about a player that has really just failed to live up to his potential. I mean, I remember when he doing his first stint with Sporting KC, there was definitely signs that he could be a decent player, especially when he decided to move to Orlando City. I thought that was going to be a really good move, but unfortunately, it turns out that was not the case because injuries, problems, and just him not able to play to the potential that he has is just getting to a point where he basically is a guy that is on his way to pretty much not gonna get another shot with another MLS team. I mean, it's getting to a point where I won't be surprised maybe Oro Russell might be thinking about retirement, even though he is only at the age of 30. And then for DC United, waiving goalkeeper Rafael Romo. I mean, there was already interest that other teams are going to get Rafael Romo, and especially, Romo, he definitely did not do his best when he came in to step in for the injured Bill Hamid, but I'll give him the benefit of the doubt because of the fact that he is a backup goalkeeper. And there's also times where, as much as he has given up some really bad goals, there's times where he at least had make some big save. And also, not to mention, his backline basically just hung him out to dry so many games. So yeah, I think overall, it's not completely totally on Romo's fault that this team gave up a ton of goals last season, but at the same time, he was not fantastic, and there's a reason why he was a backup goalkeeper that probably was not going to be bought back for DC United for this upcoming season. Now, moving on in the next news, we got St. Louis. There's some bad news for St. Louis City because it seems like Joachim Nelson will not start the beginning of the season. I forgot to put the not here. Well, he actually will not start the season. I think St. Louis fans probably saw that and like, oh, it's great to see that Joachim Nelson looks like it's going to start the season. Yeah, sorry. I might have gave St. Louis fans a little bit false hope because, yeah, it is officially announced that he is not going to be start the season. I think he's still coming off of a season-ending injury that he had last season with Byfield, and that it seems like he's not going to be ready until at the very least in the middle of the season. I've heard reports saying that they're gonna evaluate him beginning in May because he, of course, did undergo surgery during this off season. So yeah, that is definitely a huge blow for St. Louis because this was a guy that was supposed to be the centerpiece at the back line along with Tim Parker. And while St. Louis definitely does have some backup option. I mean, I'm assuming it's probably gonna be a Tim Parker and John Bell kind of partnership now for St. Louis City SC. And by the way, that's going to be something that I'll talk about in a little bit when I do the season preview about St. Louis City for this upcoming season. But yeah, that is definitely a huge blow for a guy that they know he is going to be the rock and going to be probably the captain of this team, and that now all of a sudden that they might have to rely on a bit of a backup option. And not to mention that also kind of take a hit in terms of the depth that they have at the back line, which, yeah, they are not very, very, very deep in terms of back line. They're a little bit thin at the back as we speak. But moving on, in terms of the next news, we got the Seattle Sounders unveiling Providence as their New Jersey sponsor. Now, I think this is the second time I've seen in MLS where a team decided to have their shirt sponsor that is basically named after the stadium of their rival. I mean, we saw Montreal and Toronto for a long time have wear BMO as their main sponsor, and yeah, it's kind of interesting that of course is the case, but I didn't think that was going to be the case in the Cascadia Derby too, where the Seattle Sounders basically decided to wear the jersey sponsor of their rival, the Portland Timbers, as the stadium name. But yeah, it's gonna be interesting now that when we see like a Cascadia Derby, we see like Providence as their shirt sponsor, but they're playing at Providence Park. I mean, that's good. I mean, I'm pretty sure whoever the CEO of Providence or whoever the high corporate people at Providence, they're probably gonna be in an interesting situation whenever we see like a Cascadia Derby, especially taking place at Providence Park, when basically the two teams that they gave them the money in terms of either jersey sponsor or the stadium naming rights, is going to be facing off against each other in probably the most hated rivalry in MLS. Now, speaking of stadium name, so last week we saw the Houston Dynamo renaming one of, well, not one of their stadium, but renaming their stadium to Shell Energy Stadium. Well, this week we have LAFC renaming their home venue to BMO Stadium. So for a while it seems like LAFC was going to rename their stadium because I don't think they would. The Bank of California stadium rights, I think the company pulled out on that stadium rights early, so they had to, of course, find a new stadium name. And surprisingly, they decided to go with BMO as the stadium name. And again, just the way that whenever I mention LAFC playing at BMO Stadium, it just kind of feels very Canadian because of the fact that BMO is more known as kind of like a Canadian company. And not to mention, I think this is the first time we have ever seen in league history where you see like two different teams that basically is named by the same sponsor, except they just change it from you know how Toronto basically changed it to BMO Field, and LAFC basically copied that, but they just kind of call it stadium. Yeah, that's kind of interesting to see, but at the same time, I definitely think that, you know, LAFC fan will still refer the stadium as the bank, and rightfully so. I mean, BMO is a bank company in Canada, so I guess they can still call it the bank, even though it's not called the Bank of California Stadium like it's been since the inception when this team play in that stadium. But either way, let me know in the comments below, what do you think of these news? And as always, if there's any news that I didn't mention here on the board, let me know in the comments below as always. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, make sure you guys do like, smash the subscribe button, and yeah, I of course will see you guys next time.